Hello, and welcome to this episode of Such a Nightmare, Conversations About Horror. I am half of your hosts, Katherine Troyer, and I'm so excited because I get to do one of my favorite things, which is to interview amazing people who are contributing to the world of horror. And today I'm joined by David-Jack Fletcher. Hello.
Hi, Kate. How are you?
I'm good. So now I'm going to embarrass David-Jack and myself by reading a bio. So Jack, you just have to listen to me read the words, and I will try to only semi-slaughter the ones that have R's in them. So David-Jack Fletcher is a writer and scholar hailing from Australia. With a PhD in cultural studies from Macquarie University, he has written for over a decade in an academic setting before, his words, jumping out of academia to pursue his dream of becoming a horror author and editor. To that end, he has a postgraduate certificate in editing and publishing from the University of Southern Queensland, and he completed an internship with Sydney-based Spineless Wonders and was awarded a mentorship with the Australasian Horror Writers Association, undertaken with award-winning author Paul Mannering in 2022. David-Jack has published short stories in several horror anthologies across the UK, the US, and Canada, and has appeared in international podcasts and interviews. Furthermore, his debut gay horror comedy, The Haunting of Harry Peck, was published by Rack and Rune Publishing in February 2022 and became an international Amazon bestseller. And his latest award-winning novel, Raven's Creek, is now available through all major retailers, published through his own imprint, Slashic Horror Press. And if you visit the description of this, or if you look on the end of the episode, you can see the Linktree link for all things David-Jack. Okay, it is time to begin. So I always like to start with a weird question, or a question that can kind of get the ball rolling before we jump into the deep philosophical thoughts about horror. So if you could adapt any non-horror text, and that could be film, literature, games, whatever you wanted it to be, into a horror movie, what would you pick and why?
Okay. I have to tell you, I stumbled on this one for about a week because everything that I was thinking of was pretty much very derivative of Evil Dead or my favorites. So, and then I started to think everything that I was doing was essentially recreating the final girl or a woman as the villain. And I thought, far out, that is really, really bad. What the hell's wrong with me? So, and because of my teaching and studies in gender studies and all that, I just kept thinking to myself, Barbara Creed from The Monstrous Feminine, she would slash my throat.
Yeah, she would be real upset, and I would not want to see her in a fight.
Right. So I was like, I need to step back a little bit, think about this a little bit more deeply. And what I came up with was Thomas the Tank Engine.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Tell me more.
So I used to love Thomas the Tank Engine as a kid. And I just remember it being so wholesome, and they would deal with the other train's anxieties and problems, and they'd all work together, and it was all cutesy and fun. And I thought, screw that. I'm going to change things up a little bit. So my idea was Thomas the Tank Engine, and it turns out that the Fat Controller, not my words, that's the character, turns out to be the devil, right? And he makes a deal with Thomas that he can travel along any railway network in the world. But he has to pay the devil in human hearts.
Oh, that's interesting.
So he can go and fulfill his dreams of international travel and see the world and do all of his stuff.
Yes.
And, Thomas in Italy, but he's essentially a serial killer now.
So does he kill people who board his train, or is it a little bit like the trolley experiment where, he's running over people? How is he getting the hearts? And if you did not spend that, far going, that's okay too.
I actually did fully think this through. So the way that I imagine it is that he runs people over.
Okay.
And the body parts and all that would sort of, because he's got his face at the front.
Sure.
He essentially digests them, and the heart would sort of go into a different section of his body, where the coal is normally stored.
Yes.
And he keeps up his piggy bank sort of of hearts to feed
Excellent.
to pay the devil.
And so is he going to have a moment of crisis in this film and like rebel, or is it just going to be like a wonderful slaughter through Italy?
I feel like it's not Thomas that rebels. I feel like it's more he makes the news because it's like killer train
Right.
going around like globally slaughtering people, don't catch this train and whatever. And so he starts like disguising himself as different sorts of
This is
trains.
fantastic.
And there's like some sort of like train mechanical engineer that sort of puts the clues together, like forensic science.
You know, there's a real like call for that type of stuff right now. I haven't seen it yet, in part because I don't know if one recovers from it, but you know, there's the Winnie the Pooh and the Blood Honey. And then so I just learned that Steamboat Willie is now in the it's copyright free now. It's in the public domain. And they've already like teased the Steamboat Willie horror. Now Mickey's still, of course, copyrighted, but not Steamboat Willie. So, you know, all you have to do is just wait for someone to have a lapse in their public domain stuff. And you could have Thomas Do you have a good title for it? I feel like I was trying to on the spot.
No, I didn't get that far.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
But I did also see that Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey has a sequel coming.
That's delightful.
So it must have struck
you know? Yeah. You didn't see it, did you?
Not yet. No, I'm waiting for it to.
Yeah, I am too, because I did not have the strength to see that in theaters, just on the off chance it was as bad as I'm pretty sure it is, even if it's a delightful bad. Well, I would see it, so that's great. What I love about that answer and why I like to do things like this is that, you know, like it ends up yielding all these really fascinating things. And so I'm noticing that there's some lovely parallels between this imagination of Thomas the Train and some of the other stuff you're doing, right? Which is a lot of that line of where is comedy and where is horror and where are we screaming and where are we laughing. So one of the things that is fun about your writing, and is true for all the big projects you have, is that you're often playing with different generic conventions, such as in your novella, The Haunting of Harry Peck. And for those of you listening, I was telling David-Jack that this morning, it was like the gift that kept on giving. I started laughing because I was like, oh, Peck, I get it now. Because, of course, it's about a chicken haunting. So could you discuss what you see as the relationship and value between blending horror and comedy, or horror and some of the other genres that you're doing? Because I know that you're working on, you're still working on the Vampire Project. That's not done yet, is it?
It is done.
Oh, yes. Congratulations.
That comes out in April.
Oh my gosh, that's so exciting. But I know that one is also sort of blending and playing with genres. So what is it about that like moment of intersections that you find so rich?
I guess, gosh, that's a really interesting question. And it is, again, something that I had to sort of really think my way through, because for me, nothing should be black and white. Nothing should just be like, here are the conventions, and then you go through and you do A, B, C, D, and then you've written a book. I have read a few of those, you know, how to write sort of manuals, like the Stephen King one, which I don't recommend, and the Chuck Palahniuk one, which I do recommend.
Well, I haven't read that one.
Oh, it's really good. I can't remember what it's called, but anyway, he makes some really good points. Anyway, so I guess the intersection of those genres is what can take something from very ordinary or very standard and breathe new life into it, because you don't often get stories about chickens that come back to haunt you because you killed it. Right. And I just thought, for The Haunting of Harry Peck, I kind of just thought, how ridiculous is that idea? And can it work? And so I sort of just started to think about what's funny about this. Like, is it funny or is it just stupid? And can stupid and funny work together? But my first love, obviously, being horror, I thought there was just a lot of potential to put this really naive, youngish person in this extremely crazy situation, and that alone could be really funny. And so I kind of just thought, you know, for me, horror and comedy actually share a lot in common
Mm-hmm.
because they evoke on sort of the opposite ends of the same spectrum, but they invoke that sort of abject response. You're either laughing your head off and you can feel that like rippling through your body, you know, the crying and everything like that, and the wheezing sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And then with horror, obviously the heart pumping, the sweaty palms, that sort of extrasensory perception that someone's watching you, even though they're not, like the
Right.
paranoia and everything. And I thought if we can find a way to blend those together, which has been done several times in film
Mm-hmm.
and in books, but with a really odd take,
Mm-hmm.
that might be sort of breathe new life into that sort of horror comedy genre. But with the vampire one, well, no one's going to know what it is because it hasn't come out yet, but basically it's a twist on vampirism.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, Twilight ruined vampires.
Yep.
I can't, like, I'm sorry to everyone who loves Twilight and whatever.
I mean,
But
it broke the mold, right? Regardless, even if you
it
which
did. It
love
did.
Twilight, which is a decision, you know, it changed it, right? Like it is hard to come back from it no matter what.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And there's definitely value in that. Um, it wasn't my thing, and it did. I can't really watch vampire movies anymore because it just, for me, it just doesn't do anything. I put on 30 Days of Night the other day, which I used to love, and I was just like, "Ugh."
I haven't seen that one. I haven't re-seen that one in a while. I wonder, because yeah, it was very scary at the time, but I
It's
don't
a
know if
good,
I've
like,
watched it post Twilight.
it is a good movie, but I kind of just feel like a lot of the same things are happening in
Mm-hmm.
these vampire stories. So what I wanted to do with mine was to see, it was really an experiment for myself to see if I could engage with the notion of vampirism in a way that I found interesting.
Mm.
And it wasn't just about, you know, how many bodies can you stack up? It was something about morality, and it's something about existentialism,
Mm.
the impending doom or the impending threat of our own death, what we would do to save ourselves in that case. And so to do that, I sort of veered away from that gothic sort of expectation that people have
Mm-hmm.
with vampirism, and I focused more on like a contemporary setting, not the same as Twilight, but just a contemporary setting with a really flawed main character who discovers that he's essentially having to give his own power over to something greater than him, and he
Hmm.
doesn't understand it, but he's done it.
Hmm.
And to me, there's a lot of similarity in that between, well, I guess there's something familiar in that
Mm-hmm.
with what we do with religion and things, you know, a higher power that we don't necessarily understand, but we're willing to give all of ourselves to it,
Yeah.
and sometimes at our own detriment. And those are the sorts of things I wanted to explore in that book.
That's
And I
interesting.
think it does challenge the genre conventions, hopefully.
Yeah.
So,
And I liked what you said about Harry Peck and wanting to explore, like, at one point, does something feel too absurd? Because, you know, there's a lot of, for me, at least, there were a lot of under or overtones between your text and Poe's Telltale Heart, right? And
oh yes.
and yet, is having a heart that continues to beat under the floorboards any more absurd than having a chicken haunting you, right? Like, it's really not. But in fact, but if I'm going to have one, chances are the one that would happen to me is a chicken haunting, right? Because I do eat meat, whereas I'm probably not going to murder someone and bury them in my house. So, you know, like,
Again.
yeah, not a second time anyway. Yes. So like, I think what's lovely about your interpretation of where comedy and horror intersect is that is somehow, even in its absurdity, is more relatable, right? Like it's a quieter source of horror in some ways, because it is like more intimate, right? It is like related to what I'm eating and to, you know, what's happening in my house. And that somehow makes it a little scarier, right? Like, again, I won't lie. I haven't yet added that to my list of irrational fears. But who knows? Let's give it a little bit more time, and that may be one too. But I think about all the times that like I had a nightmare the other day that my mom told me she didn't love me. That's never going to happen. My mom loves me very much, but like that still sits with me, but it's so absurd, right? And so I really liked the ways that you found how to make that which is laughable normally just a little scary. And that was really lovely. So thank you for doing that. Yeah, absolutely.
I really wanted to sort of, with all the rhetoric in Australia at least, and I also believe in the US around veganism and, you know, really challenging those meat-eating cultures. I was really interested in that at the time. And I'm vegetarian now, but I wasn't when I wrote it. I was a full
that's interesting.
meat eater.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I went to a rodeo at the start of last year that I was like, I can't do this meat thing anymore, at least for a while. But anyway, so I know a couple of people who are vegans and like, that's great. I have nothing against vegans whatsoever. But I just thought, how interesting is it to sort of think about the way our food influences the way we see the world. And our morals and ethics are connected very intimately to what we eat.
Yes.
And what we drink. And, you know, so a lot of people don't even have dairy milk, and I'm on oat milk at the moment. So, and it's sort of this, I mean, it's very much spoken about in terms of veganism, but in general, when people are thinking about, you know, eating meat and you say, why do you eat meat? And there's this sort of, well, everyone eats meat and there's no real justification necessary in a lot of people's minds because that's the way that the world works. So I sort of wanted to sort of challenge that a little bit.
Yeah.
To assume that it might be the way the world works for a lot of people, but what happens if you're in that world and it's not working for you in a really, really weird way?
And I'm probably one of the only people that can say this, but as a kid, I was actually made fun of for not being a vegetarian. So I was raised very conservatively, and we Seventh-day Adventist, and they have a huge health message. And for a while, we were the like main producers of most vegetarian meat. But in all my schools, kindergarten through my master's, all the schools I went to were vegetarian cuisine. Most of my friends were vegetarians, and I still don't eat pork or shellfish or anything like that. So like I was made fun of for bringing turkey sandwiches to school and stopped doing it very quickly because it was like I was the only one out of my entire class. Yeah. Again, not most people's experiences. But there was a lot of, like you said, morals and sort of associations with that because, you know, people would tell me, oh, what you do is so unhealthy. And then I would see their meals, which were like carbs with more carbs and some like cheese. And I was like, this is also not healthy, right? Like just because there's no meat. So it's like if you're in that world or if you've been in a world where those conversations are happening, you're right. It shapes everything about your worldview, and your sense of morals and whether or not you get to judge other people. It's a really complicated thing to try to accomplish in a novella, but it was, I think, well done.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
There's one particular image that, of like meat eating culture that someone said to me years and years ago, and it's always stuck in my head. And it's the way that people gather around the dinner table at Thanksgiving or Christmas with this like ceremonial, you know, cutting of the ham or the turkey. And it's always up to the, you know, the head of the household to do that. And it's this very sort of like patriarchal system, that no one sort of really seems to challenge.
Yes.
That's just one image that's always stuck with me, about meat eating culture, which I found very interesting.
There's an American artist named Norman Rockwell who did a lot of Americana stuff, and he has one, right, where it's one of the freedoms, and it's exactly that, right? It's the patriarchy. It's the patriarch sitting at the head of the table, and he's carving some ham or roast or something. And I swear the framing of that shot is nearly identical to some of the framing of the shots in Texas Chainsaw Massacre when they're also having a family dinner. And I've never quite been able to get that image out of my head that like these are not that far apart from each other and only one of them is considered icky. So there's definitely a lot to pursue there, which actually feeds really nicely into the third question, because in this podcast, we talk a lot about the functions of horror through this critical framework from a scholar named Linda Holland Toll of affirmative versus disaffirmative. And she says that, you know, affirmative horror portrays the source of horror as threatening our social and cultural value systems, whereas disaffirmative horror ends up revealing that we and our value systems are the source of horror. So where would you place your own horror within this framework? And I guess it's kind of that question of like, what are your thoughts about what horror, quote, should do? And how do your thoughts about horror, particularly as you're writing horror that's transgressive in a lot of ways, you know, affect the way you think about your stories?
I mean, that's a really loaded question.
Yeah, it is. So you have 5 minutes. Go.
It's almost like an essay question that you would get in like third year or masters or something, right? And it's like, we've given you so many things to talk about. Now you choose which ones you want to pursue.
Yeah, this is why I always give the questions ahead of time, because I'm like, this would be an unfair question to put to someone on the spot. So
I think obviously horror's been a place where it's been a space for the other for as long as horror's been around, whether it's to highlight social and cultural anxieties about the other. And I think a lot of zombie movies do that quite well, you know, especially during the outbreak of the AIDS epidemic and things, you know, really othering people that way. Or whether it's a space for the other and, you know, the marginalized to showcase their sameness or even the use value of their otherness, which I think is really important. So, you know, because a lot of queer people don't want to be seen as the same as hetero sexual people.
Right.
There is something to be said for that as well. So in Raven's Creek, which is the latest book that's of mine that's come out, and I guess in all my writing, I really want to highlight the ordinariness of queerness. And what I mean by ordinariness is that we're not, you know, these unicorns with superpowers, and we're not all trying to hit on you, and we're not all, you know, like we're not this sort of weird, I'm making these weird shapes with my hands because I don't really know how to actually articulate this properly, but there does seem to be this, you know, like the us versus them in a lot of texts and a lot of the way people view queerness. And the trans, you know, the rhetoric about trans people and trans communities is probably the best example to think of at the moment. And, you know, all this stuff about binary and non-binary, but we're still just people, right? And so the thing that I'm finding really interesting in exploring my own sort of style or the things I'm interested in writing about is that monstrosity itself is an all too human occurrence. And so I think that lies in the disaffirmative framework that you were talking about. And yeah, I mean, so I have a collection coming out in November as well. I have a lot going on.
Oh my gosh.
It's a long way away, but
good for you.
I wrote it about a year ago. It's just, I put it to the side, but it's actually called Hell is Other People.
Oh,
and
excellent.
you know, that's a very famous quote. And I just thought this is perfect because regardless of the subgenre of horror that I'm writing, whether it's creature feature, supernatural, more of a suspense-based thing, every story I write seems to be inspired by the idea that we as humans are the source of the horror. So we've got intergenerational trauma that we're sort of starting to scratch the surface at with a lot of things. We've got community-based horror, we've got identity horror, we've got all sorts of things that stem from our interactions with other people. And, you know, so ultimately it's it's the human that we should fear. And so in my writing, what I do, obviously that plays for me into things like homophobia, but also more general themes like greed and power, particularly in Ravens Creek. You've got the greed and the power playing there. But what I also try to do is show that in that ordinariness of queerness is that we can be evil as well. And I know that there's that, I didn't really want to talk about this because I know it's a bit problematic, but I'm going to anyway, because
excellent.
When I sent out Ravens Creek a while back to some beta readers, and one of the points of feedback I got from a few people was you cannot make gay people or queer people evil today, because there are sections of the world who will use that as an example of why gay rights and queer rights in general shouldn't be enhanced. And I thought, well, I understand that, but at the same time, if we want to get past the idea that being queer is so different and so alien and so scary, then we need to also not glorify or glamorize gay people as only being like this beacon of goodness. Because I'll tell you, I'm gay and I've got exes and I have ex-boyfriends because they were evil.
Right.
Like people in general can be bad.
Yes.
And so what I try to do in my writing is show, I write about a lot of couples, and there's normally one who's a bit, I'm trying to say this without cursing, is a bit evil or, you know, less than perfect, anger issues and so forth. So, and I think that that's really important, not only for mainstream or, you know, like the traditional reader, but also for the people who my books are more geared towards, which are other queer people. So, and I've had a lot of feedback from other queer readers and queer authors saying, basically, thank you for writing this, because the characters are real and authentic. And so I think that that's, for me, that's really important. I think I went on a massive tangent with that
this
question.
Was great. And you started to answer, so I'll skip officially the question, but one of my other questions, which was, you know, and I think about this a lot as someone who's teaching horror and therefore exposing students to it. Now they've signed up for my class, and it's called Topics in Horror, so you know, they know what they're getting into. But I struggle with the fact that it is historically been a vehicle to marginalize, silence, and break over and over again certain people. And so one of the questions which you just answered, I think, in this discussion about disaffirmative and affirmative is like, how do we deal with this genre that is often doing that? And I think you have a great answer. And it reminds me, I read an article about, there's a writer and everything else named Mindy Kaling, and she does like the Mindy Project. And the article was saying, we need to stop blaming her for continuing to create the same character. We need to blame a system that only has one Indian woman writing, right? Yeah. And it was like, we would have more diversity if we would just acknowledge that there can be more people doing this. And I feel like that's what we get when you're normalizing and just saying, hey, by the way, this person happens to also be gay. Okay, let's move on to the story. And that may mean that this person is going to be haunted or maybe doing the haunting, right? But like, I like the fact that you allow your characters to just live and to be humans who are, and humans are kind of monsters, right? So, but also they're just, you know, we're just people. So I really, that was something I found very refreshing, because I know why you label your stuff the way you do, because you probably feel like you have to make sure people know, hey, this is going to be a gay comedy horror, just in case you wanted to know. But like, I felt getting into it that I was just reading a really interesting story, and oh, by the way, it also happened to be a gay comedy horror text, and that was really nice. That's a really hard line to walk, but you did a very good job. So that's exciting.
Thank you. I have had people who are friends, and we've discussed this as well, and some of them absolutely love it and some of them don't. Yeah. And I think that's where this inevitable political nature has come into it. And I totally value that perspective of, you do need to highlight this and you do need to make a point of it to show people that we're here and we're not going away. And I do understand that and I value it. On the other side, though, is that discussion of people know we're here. People already know we're not going away. Sydney Mardi Gras is one of the biggest parades in the world, I'm pretty sure.
Wow.
The gay and lesbian Mardi Gras, people fly from all over the world to attend that. There are other things happening around the world, I think. And so now for me, I personally would like to get past the point of reinforcing the message that we're here and really just start saying or telling people what it is that we can be like. We are people. That we're here, but I'm not the same as you because everyone's different, but I probably have a lot of the same desires and needs that you do. And I think that there's something that can really connect or bridge gaps in that. And for me, that can be quite powerful.
And I think that's the magic of, again, I'm not sure that the Winnie the Pooh and the Blood Honey is going to be amazing, but the nice thing about it is indies, right? Like indie presses and indie films are able to make sure that we get to hear from so many people, because you, David-Jack, should not be responsible for being the only person representing queer horror, right? Like that's, first off, that's an impossible task, but second, like that's an unfair task. But
I'd love to do it.
Well, I will be sure to let people know because I'm definitely in charge of making that decision. And then you can just be this anonymous person. But until then, I mean, you've also you've started in between all those other tiny things like writing several books, Slashic Horror Press, which is another opportunity to make sure that we're getting to hear from all the people that are here, right? All the people that are out there. So I would just love to know several things. One, I promised I wanted to know more about your origin story, especially as I learned that you and your person who's, I don't even know Lee's last name, Lee
Cross James,
that you just met in human form for the first time recently. So I need to know the origin story, but I also just wanted to know, what are your goals and hopes for the work and authors that you're representing in your press? Because this is exciting. I just think it's so great that we live in a world where indie stuff can happen and not everyone has to rely on exclusively Stephen King to get their horror fix.
Yeah, I mean, Stephen King is a huge influence on a lot of people.
Sure.
And I have my
The
own
Shining's
views on
one
that.
of my favorite books, regardless of many of the problems. So he's not worth acknowledging, but also now we have Slashic Horror Press. So how did you get here? What are your goals and hopes? I hope that somewhere in your journey, you'll talk about how you, and again, I'm quoting you, jumped out of academia to pursue your dreams. So I'm sure that's all kind of tangled in there.
Talking to an academic, I'm not sure you do want to hear it, but I'll tell.
Yeah, probably. It's the masochist in me that's tell me about how I could not be grading. So.
Oh God, grading papers. But okay, so the origin story is essentially comes from Harry Peck. So I wrote that. I was putting it into a couple of Facebook groups and trying to get some international focus on it, and I happened to get in touch with another queer author who is American, Mark Allen Gunnels, and he's prolific. He's written a lot of things, very talented, and now one of our authors. And he said to me, if you're looking to do interviews or podcasts, that's a great way to get some additional exposure. And I said, oh gosh, I don't know. Anyway, he gave me the name of the names of two people. I did one. That was great. He's an awesome guy, but he's not queer. And that I found he's an ally, absolutely.
Sure.
And I love allies, but there is that sort of connection between people who sort of have that unspoken but shared history in terms of our experiences and the whole having to come out and everything. And the other one was Lee. The other name that he gave me was Lee. So he created a group chat. Mark created a group chat for us, to introduce us. And then Lee and I went off and started talking, and we hit it off. Like, it was like,
That's
now we
neat.
talk every day, multiple times a day, even despite the time difference. But
Yeah, how
it
big is
started
the
off-
time difference?
I'm 11 hours in front.
Oof, that's rough.
Yeah.
Especially,
so, and I'm in
is
front
he
of you as
also
well.
a morning person? Like, is that
No,
okay?
he's not.
Okay, so that makes it
He's really
easier.
not.
Okay, good. Okay.
He's like, I'm bamboozled. Leave me alone. Like, have your coffee. Just anyway. So we just started texting. He's an author as well, so he wrote Camp Silver Oaks, which is a YA gay novella.
Awesome.
And he has done really well with that. Anyway, he runs a podcast, or he ran a podcast that we're now relaunching.
Yay.
And I was on that. And then after that, it was like, oh, we just sort of found each other interesting in terms of what we were working on. Just developed over there. And then one day I was sitting on the couch, and this is what prompted me to start Slashic Horror, which used to be titled Bare Bones Press, because I love my gay bears. And
so was it spelled BEAR? Bones?
Oh, yeah.
Was it? Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it turns out there's a similarly named press in the US, and we got threatened with legal action. So we were like, let's just change the name. We're like way too early to be dealing with this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and then the name of Lee's podcast was Slashic Horror Podcast.
Very nice.
And we thought, well, if we're going to relaunch, well, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. So I was shopping Ravens Creek around, and I had a bit of interest from a couple of presses. I had a couple of meetings with publishers, and there were some that I just had a lot of red flags with. And I thought there were a few. I love what they're doing for them. It works for them. And the market is so big that everyone can be doing their own thing. And there's a place for one, and I love that. What I found, though, was that a lot of the presses were saying that they love BIPOC submissions, and they love LGBTQ plus submissions, which is great, but the central focus of the business was not to elevate queer voices. And for me, that's what I wanted to be a part of. And I was literally sitting on the couch that's just out of view of the camera one day, and I said to my husband, I want to start my own press. And why can't I do that? And he was like, well, you could. So I messaged Lee, said, Lee, buddy, what do you think about this idea? And I just laid it out in about a paragraph of text. And he was like, I'm all in. This sounds amazing. Gosh. So without even having met in person, and no video calls or anything at that point, the only time we'd seen each other's, we'd spoken over video was on the podcast. But we, as I said, we just really got along, and we have a bit of a trust in each other, which doesn't come easy for either of us, I think. And so we sort of knew we can trust each other with this. No one's going to try and steal it, do their own thing. And we're both bound by this idea that the world needs this press. I do want to give a shout out to Leith Press, who is a UK-based publisher, and they are queer as well.
Oh, that's great.
And they're in horror. They've been established for a long time, and they're doing great work. So, but I thought, I can do this as well. I can do it we can do it in a different way. And so far, I think it's working. As soon as we opened for submissions, I was falling over myself, because I thought, we'll get one or two, it was hectic.
Good for you.
And it was amazing. One of the things that has actually legitimately made me cry several times is that we get emails and I get personal messages from people telling me, saying thank you for existing, and that our press means a lot to them as a reader or as an author, because of what we're doing. And essentially what we're doing is elevating queer authors, their stories and their horrors, which I absolutely love doing. And that's probably our primary goal for the press, is to do that. Yeah, so it's been, I don't know, a bit of a crazy journey.
Yeah.
And we had to sort of figure things out on the fly, because you've got book cover artists, you've got this whole AI thing that I'd rather not get into, but it's really difficult to avoid. You've got to be really savvy to avoid it. You've got Twitter, which people start trouble on, all the time.
Yes.
And so far we've managed to avoid that.
Wow.
And I think I think it's because we put ourselves out there really transparently. We say we're unapologetically queer. And if you don't like that, we're not for you. And that's totally fine. But if you do like that, buy one of our books, submit to us, and we try to be honest with people and just real with people about what they can expect from us, what they shouldn't expect from us. And so I guess that's one of the other goals as well, is to be really supportive of the horror community in general, of the indie horror community more specifically. And I've made some great contacts with some other publishers who have been so helpful.
Oh, that's lovely.
It's really nice, and it's what I didn't expect, but what has just kind of revealed itself to me is that indie publishers and indie authors really do want to lift people up.
Yeah.
It's not the same as traditional publishing, where it's like a sort of a eat each other sort of world. So, these other presses who helped us out in the early stages, they did it for free. They didn't ask for anything in return. It was just like, we want to see you guys succeed. And that made me cry too, because it's just like, it's just like, wow, I didn't realize that we were impacting so many people, and that so many people would actually want this to work. So it's been really nice.
That's fantastic. Now, is Lee's YA novella, is it horror or?
Yes.
Okay. So I just wasn't sure if he also, on top of everything else, also did another non-horror genre.
No, he's absolutely horror. So his it's the first in a trilogy. Ooh. And I do believe we can expect the next two books soonish.
Yeah.
So, but the first one is something really important that he does, in my view, is he highlights bisexuality.
That's so important.
And for me, I think it is crucial, because, we've got this spectrum of lettering for, the queer community, but a lot of people within that, outside of it and within it, don't actually believe bisexuals exist, and it just blows my mind.
Yeah, it's one of those things I'm like, I don't understand what you don't understand. Like
what's the problem here?
Yeah.
So for his work to do that, and it was a very natural, it wasn't like a big political statement.
Right.
This character's bisexual. It was just, it unfolded in dialogue or conversation. And it was just done so well. And I think that's a really important part of his book. I hope he listens to this.
At the very least, you can text him and be like, hey, shout out was made.
Yes, exactly.
Favors were curried. Excellent.
Yeah, so he also plays with genre conventions.
That's great.
Because he sets it up like a slasher. And then it ends up being something a bit different to that. So I won't spoil it.
Yeah, because I need to add it to my list. And do you find that a lot of the stuff that comes through the press, do you find that it's often playing with conventions of the genre, almost by like default of it being queer, or is it, or are there some that are just like unabashedly, very obviously horror and also?
Yes,
Okay.
that I would say that. And I don't think everything has to
Mm-mm.
transgress or question traditional conventions and things. I think that's a stylistic choice. That's
Mm-hmm.
something that it's part of the authorial voice. It's part of the author's vision. And so we really try to respect what the author is trying to get at with their work. And there have been some. The one that's coming out in January 15.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's written by Kat Velour. Shout out to Kat. And she's written this novella called The Desert Island Game, which it's about the 5 questions. What would you bring
Yes.
to the end of the world, or the island? But it takes place after the apocalypse. The 2 last people surviving on a desert island after the apocalypse.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it's just that premise alone. I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. They're not in the apocalypse.
Yeah.
It's like the end of the world is way over there in the distance, and we're here on this island with no escape. And what's going to happen there? So it's very character driven, but it's also very, it's like got contemporary themes like gaslighting and power imbalances. But when both of the characters are women, the power dynamic there tends to change between when it's a man and a woman.
Right.
And so I find that really interesting. It's a great book. I'm super excited for it to come out.
Yeah, that's very neat.
And she's super talented, so we can expect a lot more from Kat.
And it's called The Desert Island Game, you said?
Yes.
Excellent.
It's available. I will plug it. It's available for pre-order.
Perfect.
By the time the podcast comes out, it's probably going to be out. Amazon, Barnes and Noble. We have wide distribution, so it's.
Yeah, I was going to ask, do you have a preference of where people are buying?
I think the preference is probably Amazon, and I know that's.
I know they are corporate overlords, but
But the thing is, a lot of people do place emphasis on Amazon book ratings because of the connection Amazon has to Goodreads.
Right.
So, if we get another #1 Amazon bestseller, it does tend to look good. Also, it's cheaper. People have signed up for, Prime benefits and things, so they get free delivery. So it does end up working out better for the person. But there is a website called Godless. I don't know if you've heard of this. So Godless is, it's not queer. It's just horror.
Oh.
And it's an online store.
Oh.
Ebook only. Most of our titles are on there, and, we will be adding more of our titles as we go. But it's run by Drew Stepek, and he's awesome. So he's got this website. It's Godless, and it's like underground horror. So you've got extreme, you've got, general quiet horror. You've got everything on there that people want to submit. And I've been trying to tell people, buy the digital copies from there, and then if you want the paperback, buy the paperback from Amazon or somewhere that you're going to get free shipping perhaps.
Right.
But absolutely check out Godless, because there's so much content on there that people don't put on Amazon. And it's also, there are also lots of queer titles on there.
Oh, that's great.
It's definitely, it is underground, right? So it's like a club almost, but definitely check that out.
Perfect. And I think I cut you off when you were saying the title of Lee's first book in the trilogy.
Camp Silver Oaks.
Okay, perfect.
Yes. So it's that sort of inspired by Sleepaway Camp, I believe.
Yes, excellent.
That sort of style of horror. Yeah, it's really cool.
And in 5 years feels reasonable. Where would you like in 5 years' time, what would it take for you to say, I've achieved exactly what I've wanted to achieve when it comes to Slashic Horror Press?
Oh,
which again was a question that I didn't brace you ahead of time. So feel free to like take a moment because I realized that was a big question. I just gently walked your way.
I guess it's a bit difficult to say. The thing that I would really like to see happen is our titles winning awards
Mm-hmm.
and getting a lot of mainstream recognition. Still, I always want to stay indie.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to like sell out to, you know, Simon and Schuster or whatever.
Right.
But if our authors can get a lot more recognition for the amazing work they're doing, that to me would just be really special. And I think that I could hold my head up high and say that I've achieved something really, really nice with that.
And is that what? Because I would rather lay down and slowly die than be a full-time editor. Mainly because the edited collection that I did, which was academic, we started it before the pandemic. So like, and then we had to carry it through during the pandemic. But is that like one of the things that an indie editor does? Like, is it your job to be getting it out there before people who make awards and give awards? Like, is that part of what you're doing in addition to Twittering and stuff?
Yeah. So I've got a list of, I guess, awards that run every year, or, you know, however often they run. It's tricky because I can't just put every book up for every award.
Right.
So, you know, you've got the Lambda Literary Awards, which is really cool. So a couple of those, a couple of the titles that we have will be going up for that.
That's neat.
In 2024, not for 2023. I missed the deadline. But yeah, so that is something that I do. And I am always kind of collecting email addresses and things for ARC readers who are super important to the publishing process, to get early reviews and help spread the word and things like that. So, so Lee's our marketing and advertising guy, and he does it really well. And he always says to the authors, the best sort of promotion is self-promotion. So, you know, the author still has to take some accountability, do things like podcasts, interviews, update their blog, you know, do a couple of posts on social media. They still need to be an active participant in their own advertising or marketing. There's only so much that we can do for them, but everything that we can do, we're doing, or wanting to do, and it's on the list, sort of, you know what I mean? We're a two-person operation, so it's a little bit tricky sometimes. But we're really excited to launch this year live book launches. So they'll be on Instagram. Yeah. So last year we were sort of thinking, how do we do a successful book launch when I'm in Australia, Lee's in the UK, most of the authors are in the US. By the time I'm having my breakfast, you know, they've been dreaming for 4 hours. Like, right. I sort of just chatted to Lee about, you know, do you want to do just like an Instagram live? And we'll try and figure it out as we go, because I've never done a live Instagram before. It seems super easy, but we're really excited to be able to sort of launch that. However successful they are is however successful they are, but we want to do it anyway because it gets the author the opportunity to tell all their friends or their family, everyone in their network, hey, I'm doing a live thing, you know, and it might help sales, it might not, but at least it's going to get some more exposure for the author. So yeah, I'm really excited. And the first one is the 15th of January.
Yes, which this episode may not be out in time for, but if I can, I'll try to have it out in time. That's really neat.
We have a pretty tight schedule with the releases. So every release we do comes out on the 15th of the month.
Oh, okay.
So we wanted to keep it standard so people know.
I like that.
You know, the 15th, we can expect a new Slashic book.
And you have one lined up for every month?
Yeah, 2024 is.
Congratulations.
So what we decided was because burnout is real, we
Yes.
decided that we're going to take 2 months of the year without a release,
Good.
but to compensate for that, 2 of the other months will have 2 releases.
Okay. Okay.
So we're going to do 12 books a year. That's pretty
Yes.
much the most that we can handle. It's probably
Absolutely.
more.
I was going to say maybe a little bit many for two, but okay.
But yeah, so every 15th, excluding June and December,
Mhm.
there will be a release, and every 15th, according to US time, EST, there will be a live Instagram book launch.
I think that's so lovely. There are so many obviously advantages and advantages to the world we live in now that like you could have a partnership with someone in the UK, but like I don't know, the romantic in me just misses that idea of there being able to be like a launch party, right? Where like everyone comes together and
Yeah.
just celebrates the incredibleness that is a whole bunch of people giving a whole bunch of time and creativity to something. So that's really, that just makes me so happy. I think that's such a lovely idea.
I hope it works, and obviously you're more than welcome to come along.
Yes. And I
All
don't
your friends, family.
tend to do a ton of, I'm really bad about having time. But I know that like my friends who have channels and do mainly YouTube live, but they do, like there's just something lovely about celebrating synchronously in a world where everything feels asynchronous. So
I agree.
that's exciting. And the time will only be semi miserable for you and Lee if it's in EST time.
It'll be 7 p.m. EST, and I don't know how many hours different to the US, but I think it should be okay.
Okay.
Plus, it's only a one-off.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
Every month.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm just really excited to be able to organize something like that for the authors.
Yeah.
Because we already have, I think, like 5 or 6 titles out, and we didn't do that for any of them. And I always felt terrible because I'm like, no one's celebrating with you. Like, I'm messaging you saying, oh my God.
Yeah.
Congratulations. And they're excited in their own little bubble, but to be able to share it. So.
Oh, that's so lovely. So you've told me about Slashic Horror Press. The fifth question I think you've answered beautifully, which is just like, how do we reconcile, especially, as a queer artist and I myself as a queer scholar, like how do we reconcile horror with the things it does to others? So you've answered that question lovely. So I'm going to just kind of end with our final one, which is just more opportunities for you to tell me a little bit about what's next for you, specifically, David-Jack. What's next for Slashic Horror Press? I know your website is actually really nice. The websites are often not very nice. Yeah. And it's very easy to use. Is that where people would go to find everything or should they also be, I assume that's where they can find social media information too, right?
Yeah. So at the top right on the website, they've got the little links to, Twitter and Instagram and things. You can pretty much just on every social media follow us on, Perfect. I think it's just at Slashic Horror Press.
Perfect.
We tried to make it the same for everything. So
good.
And I have a TikTok that, God, I'm really not great at it. But I'm trying. And so I have this TikTok account that's also at Slashic Horror Press.
Perfect.
But it's so check me out on there and follow me.
So let's assume that this episode doesn't come out in time for Desert Island Questions. What is your February 15 release?
Okay, so this is a sapphic novella called Pyramidia, and it's by Stephanie Sanders Jacob. She has written this really cool, she calls them MGMs, but I call them pyramid schemes.
Yes.
And it's this novella about this woman who moves to a new town for a teaching job. And she sort of gets pulled into this community of, or this group of women who are everything that she thinks she's not. They're graceful and beautiful and flawless and blah, blah, blah. And she ends up getting involved in their MGM,
Mm-hmm.
which is selling this addictive tea called Serenity.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I won't say any more about the plot.
Yeah.
It's a fun read. It's actually, I think it's a novel. It's not a novella.
Oh,
Sorry,
that's
that's my bad.
exciting.
But, yeah, it's really fun. We had a great time workshopping ideas for the cover, and it's a lot of fun. So that comes out February 15,
Perfect.
and we normally do 4 weeks of pre-orders
Okay.
because I found when we released Ravens Creek, that was our first release, we had the pre-orders for like 6 weeks or no, it was longer than that. It was like 10 weeks or
Oh,
something.
that's a long time. Yeah.
And it's okay if you keep plugging it, but then it's almost like people are going to get sick of seeing it, and then they're actually not going to pre-order it because they got annoyed.
Oh my gosh.
So that's what I think anyway. So we normally do about 4 weeks, and we just plug it a couple of times during that on the different channels, and that seems to help with pre-orders. But yeah, so Stephanie will be doing a launch on the 15th as well.
Perfect. And I know pre-orders are really important. At least that's what the internet tells me. Maybe it's not true.
It really depends on your goals, actually. Because
Okay.
I was doing some research on this, and it depends on what sort of book you're doing. It depends on what sort of release you want. So you could do something that creates a bit more mystique around it, no pre-orders, and then it's just like available soon, and you ask, you pose questions to people like, what is such and such, and then find out this date.
I see.
And then people excited for the release, then you hold the launch, and then you tell them to buy it at the launch, and so it really does depend.
Okay, perfect. And on your website, if people were interested in going through the process to potentially become ARC readers or to submit, all of that is available for information on the site?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
The ARC thing, just email us.
Okay, perfect.
At Slashic Horror Press, slashichorrorpress@gmail.com.
Yeah.
But for the submission process, that's all on there. We're closed at the moment because we've got our 2024 schedule done.
It's exciting.
It was done in like September. It was crazy.
Oh my gosh, good for you.
And so we're going to be reopening again in June.
Okay.
For 2025.
Perfect. And then you yourself have a couple of things coming out in the foreseeable bit.
What's next for me? This is that self-promotion thing I was talking about.
I know.
Suddenly I'm all clammy and I'm like, I want to go home. But I mentioned earlier, April is my next release. It's called The Count, and that's the twist on vampirism. People seem to be enjoying it so far.
Good.
Got some really cool blurbs for it too. Got one from Steve Strad, who's quite popular, and I'm getting one from Brianna Morgan, and
that's great.
I'm so excited about that, and also just to connect with them in general, right? So that's in April. Then the next release that I have is November, and that's the short story collection. So the short story collection, Hell is Other People, is a combination, or a collation of stories that I've had published previously that I'm re-releasing and also re-editing, as well as some new additions that people haven't seen before.
Oh, that's exciting. And is The Count novel length, novella length, somewhere between?
It's a novel.
Perfect. Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah. So the Hell is Other People one, there's a story in there I'm really excited about called An Honest Worm. And it's a body horror thing, but the reason I'm mentioning it is because it goes back to some of the things we were saying before about, what should horror do and that sort of stuff. So this one is about body positivity.
Oh, that's interesting.
Sort of challenging notions of normativity, normal bodies, what bodies should be capable of, what we should look like. So it's about this gay bear, obviously, because I love them, who he gets rejected a lot on Growler, which is like a gay bear version of Grindr. And I love the name of it.
Yeah,
And,
no, that's amazing.
and he starts to feel really bad about his weight. So he starts, looking up treatments and things like that don't involve going to the gym. And he discovers there's this new elite treatment at a gorgeous spa at the top of a mountain. And he's like, I'll do it, I'll do anything at this point. But the treatment is called magic mud. And you're supposed to just sit in it and the weight will just seep out. Like the fat cells will just seep out of your pores. I don't even know if that's scientifically possible, but in my book it is.
Absolutely.
And so I'm really excited about it because once they get into the magic mud, some really, really gross, fun things start to happen.
Yeah, I was assuming it wasn't going to end with like the end. Oh, that sounds great. That is exciting.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm really excited about that story in particular.
Yes. And is that a new one to the collection, or is that one? Yeah. Okay. Perfect.
Yeah. So no one has read it.
Oh, that's exciting. And is that coming out through Slashic, or is that coming out through another press?
Through Slashic.
Perfect.
So other than that, now I'm working on the next book, which is called Indentured. And it was supposed to be a horror comedy, but it's not coming out funny. And I've decided that that's okay. I want the story to just sort of reveal itself, as sometimes they do. And it's quite grim, but it's essentially about a father and son. The father is aging; he's elderly in a home, and the son gets him a pair of dentures because he needs.
I was hoping that's where that was going to go. I was hoping there'd be a pun. Excellent. Okay.
And the teeth are cursed, so basically, whoever wears the teeth has to eat what the teeth wants them to eat.
Oh, that's interesting.
And of course, that's human beings. So it's a story.
Of course. What else would a dentures want?
It's a story about cannibalism, about family bonding, about long-held, long-buried family secrets. And basically the son decides he wants to help, in order to get closer to his father and build on a relationship with him. He's going to help him get new victims for the teeth.
Interesting.
Yeah, so.
Oh, that's great. I'm so excited.
Love story.
Just your average denture story. That's amazing.
So other than that,
I mean, I assume at some point you sleep, right?
Well, yeah. Not last night I didn't. I stayed up watching Renfield, which I thought was really fun.
I was pleasantly, because I wasn't sure, I wanted to like it. But I, have learned to just have low expectations when it comes to most films now. But it was delightfully goofy in all the ways it should be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love the whole like toxic relationship thing. And,
yes.
Yeah. And the otother group members at the at DRAAG group.
Yes.
There were so many things about it that I loved.
Yes.
And all the limbs flying around everywhere.
I know. The violence was handled so perfectly and so comedically.
Yeah.
Like it was a perfect example of how you can have a lot of gore and still have it be very amusing. So that, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but other than last night, I assume you sleep somewhere in, but you said you have a whole spreadsheet.
I have a
just
whiteboard.
Wow. Okay.
So at my desk in the office, I've got this whiteboard and it's just the titles that I want to work on.
Oh, that's...
I just do the titles for some reason. And then when I see the word or what the title is, that's what I know what it is. I know what I'm going to write it down. I have a couple of notes stashed away somewhere, but inevitably I don't look at them. So I've got, including Indentured, I've got 6 books that need to be written. and I hope they're all a bit different. But I was also talking to someone the other day who suggested that I submit to Leith Press or another press.
Sure.
And I said, well, why would I do that when I have my own imprint? And they said, well, it can be nice to sit back and let someone else handle all that stuff so you can keep building your brand. And I said, oh, I hadn't actually thought about that. And that's such an amazing idea. So if Leith will have me, I might submit one or two to them.
That would be nice to like get to just be the author for a minute. And
yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And, you know, and then it would also open up potentially 2 more spots in our lineup to get more voices out there. So yeah,
and
I'm thinking about it.
The list on the whiteboard, are some of those titles short stories as well, or is it novels for the next little bit? Okay.
I love writing novels.
Yeah.
I started with short stories. So I have been writing for the longest time. But then when I fell into academia, which I didn't intend to, like none of us intend to, right? It's sort of just like, oh, do you want a job teaching? And you're like, yeah, sure. Money's money. And then they're like, oh, this position's come up. You should apply. And you're like, sure, more money, more money. And then you find out that you're 60 years old and don't know where your life went. But
yep. There is that.
But so when I fell into academia, I was doing my PhD and I was working 3 different jobs, all in academia, and also trying to do papers outside of the PhD and everything to get my publishing thing up, which never actually happened. And so I stopped writing for about a decade, and so miserable for portions of that because I just missed it so much.
Yeah.
So when I decided to get back into writing, it was actually because I was getting bullied and harassed in the workplace. Yeah, thanks for that.
Good times.
And so then I decided I want to start pursuing something that's really important to me, and that's my writing. So it started with short stories to help me get back into the process of it.
Yeah.
And, you know, help the creative juices flow a little bit. And I think that seemed to work really well. And now I love writing novel. Having said that, though, I did recently write a story. One of my friends also in the UK said to me, there's this open call and I really like your work, so you should submit to it. And I said no twice because I'm like, I just don't have time for that. And then one day I found myself sitting on the couch with some spare time, and I thought, you know what, I'm gonna just write this story. So it took me about 2 hours, 4,500 words, and did a quick edit, sent it off, and they came back to me 2 days later saying, we've shortlisted you and we'll let you in February. And I was just like, that actually made me feel really good.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely something about the quicker turnaround, right? Like no one's like, I wrote a novel in a couple hours the other day. You know, there's something about that, like the instant potential for instant gratification that's a little hard to sometimes let go of.
Because I had told a few people, oh, you know, they've asked me to, and I'm not going to do it, and no one really cared. They were just like, oh, okay, cool. And then it just demotivated me even more. And then I think that actually I think led to me saying to myself, no, I'm going to do this because why not?
Yeah.
So,
oh, that's great.
Yeah, so that one is about a haunted hairbrush.
Excellent.
Which I'm not sure has been done before. So
yeah, I'm like going through the list. I don't know of any. So that's exciting. That's very exciting. Well, I have kept you more than enough time for today because you have like you have a whiteboard to get back to, right? So every minute here is oh, I'm so sorry. Then you're probably like, let's have this interview last longer. Yeah, we haven't started the term yet, so I'm not using you as procrastination, but often these interviews are. But thank you so much, David-Jack. It has been an absolute pleasure. To everyone listening, you can see all the Linktree stuff, all the links. You should reach out to David-Jack. You should reach out to Slashic Horror Press. And to those of you listening, thank you so much for listening to our nightmares. And David-Jack, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I've had a great time.
David-Jack Fletcher is a writer and scholar hailing from Australia. With a PhD from Macquarie University in Cultural Studies, he wrote for over a decade in an academic setting before, in his words, jumping out of academia to pursue his dream of becoming a horror author and editor. To that end, he has a postgraduate certificate in editing and publishing from the University of Southern Queensland, and he completed an internship with Sydney-based Spineless Wonders. Additionally, he was awarded a mentorship with the Australasian Horror Writers Association in 2022, undertaken with award-winning author Paul Mannering. David-Jack has published short stories in several horror anthologies across the UK, the US, and Canada, and has appeared in international podcasts and interviews. Furthermore, his debut gay horror comedy, The Haunting of Harry Peck, was published by Rack and Ruin Publishing in February 2022 and became an international Amazon bestseller. And his latest award-winning novel, Raven's Creek, is now available through all major retailers, published through his own imprint, Slashic Horror. For more information, visit his Linktree.